Hey everybody, welcome back to Football Talk with Vinny. In today's video, we're going to be recapping Week 4 of the NFL season. So with that, we'll start with the Thursday night game, and that game was 24-21, Cincinnati over Jacksonville. I think that game was definitely Trevor Lawrence's best game he's played so far this season. I'm going to just give you the stat line for him. He was 17 for 24, 204 yards, no touchdowns, no interceptions, but he had an 82.3 quarterback rating, which is actually very high. I think if his quarterback rating for the year was 82, he'd be in the top 10. That's how good that is. They were able to run the ball in Cincinnati. James Robinson had 18 carries, for 78 yards. Trevor Lawrence added another 8 carries for 36 yards. They had 3 total rushing touchdowns between the two of them. So obviously with this one, Jacksonville was up 14-0, and gives Cincinnati a lot of credit. They were able to come back and take a lead, and obviously with Jacksonville tying it up, kick a game-winning field goal. Joe Burrow was very good in this one too. He was 25 of 32, 348 yards, 2 TDs, no interceptions. Joe Mixon had 16 carries for 67 yards and a TD. So obviously for Jacksonville, again, didn't get a win, but you're getting closer, right? You're starting to play a little better. For Cincinnati, starting off 3-1, again, like I said earlier in the video, that just because you start off 3-1, 4-0, doesn't guarantee you're going to get in the playoffs. This might be one of the teams that maybe starts off a little hot, maybe doesn't make the playoffs. But again, if you're a Cincinnati Bengals fan, you have to feel excited that you are 3-1 at this point in the season. And with Joe Burrow and that offense, you definitely have a chance to make the postseason. Next, we'll do the Washington football team and Atlanta Falcons. This one was 34-30 Washington. Speaking of players playing the best games they have all season, I add Matt Ryan to that list against a good Washington defense, which I guess at this point through 4 weeks, you may have to question how good their defense actually is. They've given up a ton of points and had a lot of offenses play very well against them. But Matt Ryan's numbers were 25 of 42, 283 yards, 4 TDs, no interceptions. They weren't able to run the ball much because they were ahead most of the game. They did give a lot of attempts. They had 28 carries for 99 yards as a team. So they averaged 3.5 yards a carry. So a little bit below what you kind of want from anywhere from 4 to 4.5 yards a carry if you're able to kind of run the ball effectively. Cordarrelle Patterson had a very good game. Obviously, he had a couple carries as he is essentially a running back, even though he's a receiver. But in the receiving game, he did most of his damage with 5 catches for 82 yards with 3 TDs on the day, so he had himself a good game. On the other end, Washington's offense has played really all season surprisingly well, right? They put up 30 points against the Giants, now 34 against Atlanta, albeit maybe not great defense in Atlanta, but still their offense is not the reason why they're losing some of these games. Heinicke finished 23 of 33, 290 yards, 3 touchdowns with an 84 quarterback rating. Obviously, for your Atlanta Falcons fan, this is a bad loss at this point, dropping yourself to 1-3. Statistically, it's very difficult to make the playoffs at 1-3 because now you're going to have to go on a 3, 4, 5 game win streak just to kind of get back into it. If you had won at 2-2, you would have given yourself a chance to kind of be in that playoff mix and not have to rattle off 4 or 5 straight victories. Now, obviously, I think they're capable of doing it with the offense that they have, right? They just need their defense to start playing a little better. But we've been saying this about the Atlanta Falcons for 5, 6, 7 years, it seems like now. If you're Washington, huge win. I know Dallas won. We'll get into that in a minute. But you definitely want to keep pace with the Dallas Cowboys for the division. And also, again, you want to stay around that 500 marker or maybe a little bit over it in order to be in that playoff race come December, right? You don't want to be, 12 weeks in the season. You don't want to be like 4-8, 5-7. You'd rather be 6-6, 12 weeks in the season or better. This way you have a legit chance once December comes of making a playoff push. Next, we're going to talk about the Texans and Bills. This game was obviously a 40-0 blowout, so I won't go too much into it. The only thing that was a little shocking was, at the end of the first quarter, it was only 7-0 Buffalo. So Houston actually had their chances. They went for it on 4th down, didn't convert, right? They had some opportunities to stay in the game early. And obviously, when you're a good team like Buffalo, once you get up big and the other team is now forced to have to throw the ball, come from behind, that's where Buffalo plays better. Most teams play better when they have a huge lead because the opposing team is now forced into kind of playing outside of their game plan because they have to throw it a little more. And when you're starting a rookie quarterback, it's never good. But Buffalo, again, at this point, looks not only like the best team in the AFC, but the best team in the NFL with the Los Angeles Rams losing to the Arizona Cardinals. I think at this point, Buffalo has definitely played the best. Obviously, this is their biggest test coming up as they go into Arrowhead this week to face the Kansas City Chiefs. So we'll see who comes out victorious in that one. But if Kansas City were to win that game, I think a lot of people at that point would probably have a different #1 team at the top of their rankings if they were to lose. But again, this is a big game, big test for Buffalo. I think it's going to be a bigger test for them defensively because, again, you look at some of the offenses they've played in the last couple of weeks. You know, yes, they've gotten shutouts and you give them credit for it, but you've played Houston with a backup quarterback, Miami with essentially a backup quarterback because Tua got hurt. You know, for Washington, they hit a couple big plays, had a couple turnovers that gave them the short field. So we'll see really how good Buffalo's defense is going into Arrowhead. Next, we'll go over the Bears-Lions, with the Bears winning it 24-14. From the Bears' perspective, obviously Justin Fields played a much better game. The offense was able to move the ball, albeit it was Detroit, but they were able to move the ball and get some touchdowns early in order to, give yourself a chance because the Detroit offense, they were able to move the ball. They had a couple of unfortunate turnovers in the red zone. If not for that, they may have been able to win this game. But, again, give Chicago's defense credit. They were able to get some timely turnovers to really give themselves a chance to win the game. Nothing spectacular from Justin Fields, but obviously played much better than he had in his first start. Today he was 11 for 17, 209 yards, no touchdowns and a pick. Not today, I meant this week. But again, from the game he had the week before where he literally could not move the ball, at least at this point you threw for 200 yards. You were able to make some throws downfield, which obviously helps the running game. Montgomery had 23 carries, 106 yards, 2 TDs, and Williams, the backup, had 8 carries for 55 yards with a touchdown as well. So again, like we talked about, you're Chicago and any team, getting that second win and getting to 2-2 is huge. If they had lost to Detroit and fell to 1-3, obviously you'd be having a much different conversation. I think the fire Matt Nagy conversations would be so loud at this point, you may almost have to fire him at a 1-3 start. For Detroit, we already knew they were going to be a struggling team, but again, they're always competitive. They're in these ball games. Again, a couple of unfortunate turnovers. The one on these bad snap exchange where the quarterback was trying to make an audible at the line of scrimmage, hits his shoulder pad in the D line and picks it. We could be talking about a different ball game. But I think if you're Detroit, you have to feel like at least our team is competing. We knew we weren't going to be good this year. That's why we traded Stafford away. We got multiple first-round picks for him. Right? We are in a rebuilding year, so you can't be too disappointed. You have to just be happy, with the fact that you're at least competing. Next, we'll go over the Panthers-Cowboys, and this one, the final score was actually not as close as it was. The final score was actually made it sound closer than it was with a 36-28 score. Obviously, in the first half, it was extremely close at 14-13 Carolina, but in that third quarter, Dallas went on a stretch where they scored 3 straight touchdowns and a field goal early in that fourth quarter to kind of put the game away. You were up 36-14 at that point. And then for my fantasy team, specifically, I had DJ Moore. He scored 2 late touchdowns to give me a very narrow victory in my fantasy league, but also makes Sam Darnold's stats look a little better than they were. But again, I don't know if Sam Darnold struggled because, again, he was pretty good in the first half. It's more that Dallas Cowboys offense, once it got rolling, again, when you get behind, there's not many teams that can be down 14, 21 points and come back because you have to have an offense and a quarterback specifically that is so good that even though everyone knows you're passing, you could still get it done. There's not many quarterbacks in the league that can do that, unfortunately. And you saw it this week with Sam Darnold. Again, I don't know if this is a detractor to, Sam Darnold playing a bad game, because again, it's not like I'm up here saying that Sam Darnold is a Pro Bowl caliber quarterback and he's a top 10 guy. Again, I just said he's much better than he was in New York. But I think this game, again, once you are down so much and you have to throw, eventually the defense is going to make a play. We'll go over the stats a little bit, especially for the Dallas Cowboys. Dak Prescott was 14 for 22, 188 yards, 4 TDs on the 22 attempts. That's got to be one of his lowest attempt totals in the last several seasons that he actually played every game, not the Giants game where he got hurt. But again, the Dallas Cowboys rushing attack was very good. And for all the Zeke haters out there, some of them are actual Cowboys fans, the Zeke haters. He had 20 carries, 143 yards, and a touchdown, whereas Pollard had 10 carries for 67 yards. So he was effective as well. And again, if the running game could be that efficient, we understand now that Dak is definitely a much better quarterback than he was his rookie at his first year in the league, where he actually wasn't winning us ball games. It was more so the running game, and just having that time of possession and the play action game that came off of it. But we know now that if you ask Dak to throw it 40, 50 times and win you a ball game, he can certainly do it. So because you know he can do it, when that ground game is helping aid Dak Prescott, it makes the offense literally unstoppable. And then we'll quickly go over Carolina's numbers. Again, a lot of those stats came in kind of garbage time once you're down 24 points, but we'll go over them anyways. Sam Darnold did finish the game 26 of 39, 301, and 2 TDs with 2 interceptions. And then Chuba Hubbard had 13 carries for 67 yards. Sam Darnold added another 6 carries for 35 yards and 2 TDs. So Darnold had 4 touchdowns on the day. I think his first 2 were rushing touchdowns to give them, that lead 14 to 13 at half. And then the last 2 touchdowns, again, were in garbage time at the end of the fourth quarter. Again, for Carolina, you're losing the game, but you're still at 3-1. You're still in a position where you're in a good spot, right? If over the next 4 games, if you were to go 3-1 again, you're looking at a 6-2 start, which is fantastic. So again, 1 loss on the road to a good Dallas Cowboys team shouldn't, hopefully go into a downward spiral. If you're Carolina, they still played very well in the first half. Again, it got away from them in the third quarter. But again, there's not many offenses that can do what Dallas did. For the Dallas Cowboys, huge win. You keep that 1-game lead over the Washington football team, who you still have to play twice this season. I think the way their D-line is with Washington, we're talking, that's not a game I'm looking forward to as a Cowboys fan, so we may lose one or both of those games. So again, if you're the Dallas Cowboys, you want to continue to stack some wins, right? So you can kind of, eventually maybe Washington will lose some games and you'll have a comfortable lead this way. If they do get a game or 2 on you, you could still win the division. Next, we'll go over the Colts and Dolphins. The Colts winning that game 27-17. Obviously, if you're Indy, this is a must-win game at 0-3 coming in here. If you drop to 0-4, your chances of making the playoffs, I think, is probably under, statistically, like 5%. I want to say even lower. I want to say maybe the last team to do it was actually the Saints team, I think about 3 years ago. I think this is Kamara's rookie season, so it might have been 4 years ago. It was a year they started off actually 0-4, and then they reeled off like 11 straight wins in a row. Finished the year like 11-5. I think they lost their last game of the season. It's very difficult to start 0-4 and make the postseason, because now you're talking about having to reel off 4 or 5 victories just to get back to 500, and then you have to win a couple more games too to finish with 9 or 10 wins just to get into the postseason. For Miami, this is the 3rd straight loss. They're actually 1 play away from being an 0-4 start. Again, if New England, that opening season game, if that running back, Damian Harris, I believe, did not fumble on that possession where New England was about to kick a field goal to take a lead, they may be staring at an 0-4 season. And again, for Miami, this is what I kind of said, even though Miami was a 10-team win last year, I didn't feel like the defense could come back again and play at a top 3 level like they did last year. And I thought that offense was not going to make significant improvements enough to be a playoff caliber team. Now, who knows? It's early in the season, so we'll see. But so far, this is kind of how I thought Miami would kind of come back to about a 5, 6, 7 win team. Because again, they're still a very young team and they need a couple more years. Tua needs some more time as well. And again, I know it's very early in his career, but there was injury concerns when they drafted him. So the fact that he got hurt is obviously not a good sign. Hopefully when he comes back, he can play well and, show improvements. And again, even if they don't make the playoffs this year, again, they have a young team. With any young team, you just want to see improvement and growth. It's not necessarily about the wins or losses. But with the game, as far as it's concerned, Indy kind of controlled the clock, kind of controlled the line of scrimmage on really both sides, really the entire game. They were able to rush 33 times for 139 yards, while holding Miami to 16 carries for 35 yards, So completely just dominated, both lines of scrimmage. Which obviously is going to make it tough for the opposing quarterback, but give Jacoby Brissett some credit. He was 20 for 30 with 199 yards and 2 touchdowns and no turnovers, or at least no interceptions. Yeah, at least no interceptions. He did have 2 fumbles and one was recovered by himself. But again, this is kind of the Indy team that you thought you were going to get in the first couple weeks. Now, obviously, they did lose to some good teams, you know, some high-powered offenses in Seattle and Tennessee. But if you're Indy, obviously, it's a huge win. You know, I get it. Your playoff chances at 1-3 are still not very good, but it's obviously much better than it had you drop to 0-4. Next, we'll go over Cleveland and Minnesota. This was obviously a defensive battle, with Cleveland winning 14-7. Obviously, huge credit to the Cleveland defense. Minnesota's offense had been on fire the entire season, and they were able to actually just shut them out to 7 points. They were able to hold Kirk Cousins and that offense down. Kirk Cousins finished for 20 for 38, 203 yards, 1 touchdown, and a pick. Dalvin Cook only had 9 carries for 34 yards. Madison, 10 carries for 20 yards. So really couldn't get much going on the ground game, which makes it more difficult to pass. You know, and your Cleveland has a good defense, not only the front 7, but also the back end. You got some young players that are good. I think I was more surprised at how bad Cleveland's offense played. I get it, Minnesota's defense is not terrible, but they haven't been particularly good this season either. And they were only able to put up 14 points. You know, if you're Cleveland and you're that offense, I get it, you're off to a 3-1 start, so, you know, you'll take a win, but you want to kind of score some more points in that game to give your defense a kind of a break and not have to, you know, play such dominant defense all game long. You know, Baker was normal, 15-33, 155 yards, right? No touchdowns, but no picks. So just played a kind of average game. The running game kind of carried him. 21 carries for Nick Chubb for 100 yards, 14 carries for Kareem Hunt for 69 yards and a touchdown. So they were able to really just control the line of scrimmage. Obviously for Cleveland, you just want to keep stacking these victories, you know, get back into the postseason. And again, you know, with how good their team is, I think they're going to be a very difficult outcome postseason time. For Minnesota, obviously, I wouldn't say a tough loss. You probably were expected to lose to a very good Cleveland team. You know, at 1-3, that's never great, but if you can reel off 2 or 3 victories in a row, which I think Minnesota is capable of, again, you know, I know we'll talk about the Cardinals in a minute, they're undefeated, but you were able to really play a very close game with Cleveland and now Arizona. So again, that's 2 very good football teams that you were in both of those games. So I don't think there's too much panic in Minnesota. Obviously, starting 1-3 is not great. If you lose some games now that maybe you're projected to win, right, you almost can't lose those games if you want to make the postseason. Next, we'll go over the Giants and Saints. You know, the Saints were up most of the game, so give the Giants credit. Late in that 4th quarter, they were able to score 10 points to send it into overtime and then score the game-ending touchdown to quiet the crowd, as Saquon Barkley did. And obviously now, 4 weeks into the season, you can see each week kind of Saquon getting more comfortable running, right, not really worrying about his previous injury. So obviously this was Saquon's probably best game, as he had 13 carries for 52 yards on the ground and a touchdown, but also added another 5 carries for 74 yards and a touchdown. Danny Dimes, like I said earlier in the year, I was kind of scared of him and the Giants in particular as being the best team. Obviously, they got off to a pretty bad start, but Danny Dimes against a very good New Orleans defense kind of carved them up. He was 28 of 40, 402 yards, 2 TDs, and 1 interception, so he played very well. With the Saints, obviously, defensively, didn't have the game you wanted to have. Your offense did put up 21 points. But again, this passing game for New Orleans is almost like non-existent. I mean, if you are Jameis Winston, he probably threw for as many yards as he has all season, and he only had 226 yards passing, 17 of 23, 1 touchdown. So it's just an efficient passing game where they kind of just rely on the running game. But that's not good in certain games where, you know, maybe when you play some better offenses that can take a lead on you, they're going to be a very difficult team to come back from behind if you're New Orleans. If they ever get down, they may lose a lot of those games because their pass offense is just abysmal. I know Michael Thomas should be coming back in a few weeks. Maybe that'll change their passing game dynamics because you'll have to double Michael Thomas, which will have, you know, other guys be open. But at this point, this offense really just relies on the run. And it was very good this game. You know, they played well enough offensively to get a win. With Kamara, he had 26 carries for 120 yards. Taysom Hill had 6 carries, but did score twice on those carries for 28 yards. For New Orleans, losing at 2-2, obviously you would have loved to get the win and go up to 3-1. But at 2-2, you're still in a playoff race. I know it's so early in the season, you don't want to say the word playoff race, but again, you want to make sure you're still around that 500 marker, so at least come December, you are still in the playoff hunt. For the Giants, huge win. You definitely needed it. You go in, you play Dallas this upcoming week. If you're able to beat the Dallas Cowboys and go in and get a victory there against the Dallas Cowboys, you're able to jump up to 2-3 while knocking Dallas down to 3-2, and now all of a sudden you're only 1 game out of the playoffs. Obviously, it makes this game against Dallas huge because if you were to lose, you drop to 1-4 and you make Dallas 4-1, and now you're back 3 games. Not only that, but you lost the tiebreaker, so you're essentially back 4 games. So this would be a devastating loss if you lose to the Dallas Cowboys, so it makes it a huge game coming up for the Giants. Next, we'll go into the Jets and Titans. With this game, obviously the Jets getting their first win in overtime, 27-24. Now, obviously, if you're Tennessee, you play without both your starting wide receivers in Julio Jones and A.J. Brown, but you were still able to put up 24 points, albeit against a bad Jets defense. But again, without your top 2 receivers, everyone knows you're probably going to run the ball, and Derrick Henry was still able to have an effective game where he had 33 carries, 157 yards, and a touchdown. So when everyone knows you can run it, and knows you're going to run it, and you still can run effectively, that says a lot, not only about Derrick Henry, but the offensive line as well. Tannehill was able to be pretty good through the air considering he was out without both of his weapons. He was 30 of 49, 298 yards, and 1 touchdown. But I mean, I think this game was more disappointed, obviously, in the Tennessee Titans defense and how they played. But obviously, you want to give Zach Wilson some credit. This is why they took Zach Wilson with the number 2 pick. Some of the throws he made that game were throws that most quarterbacks in this league cannot make. The one throw specifically late in the ball game, he's rolling out to his right. He literally waves down the receiver to keep going deep. And then as he's kind of running, he stops as he gets hit and he chucks it like 55 yards, 60 yards downfield. Just a dot, just a rope throw right in his hands. Like, not many quarterbacks can do stuff like that. This is definitely Zach Wilson's best game he's played all season. He was 21 of 34, 297 yards, 2 touchdowns and 1 interception with a 41.8 quarterback rating. It's not a huge rating, but again, you are a rookie. You're going to make some mistakes, but it's really those wow throws guys like Zach Wilson and not many other guys in this league can make. The Jets' ground game was kind of non-existent. They tried to run it because they were obviously still in the game, but 25 carries for 66 yards at a 2.6 yard per carry average. That ground game is not helping Zach Wilson. He's under a lot of pressure. He's having to throw it every down. And obviously this game, he's a rookie quarterback, so he's going to have some ups and downs, but this game was his best game. Obviously, from the Jets' perspective, the amount of wins you have this season, I don't know, is too relevant. You already know you're a young, developing football team that you're going to have some struggles this year. But for Tennessee, obviously a very, very huge loss. We understand you're without your top 2 wide receivers, but I think most people expected you to go in there and still be able to beat a bad Jets football team. You were up at that point multiple times by double digits. I think they were up 10-0 early, and then they were still up in the 4th quarter. So the ability to have leads multiple points in that game and not be able to kind of put a bad Jets team away, kind of disappointing. I guess the fortunate part is their division is so bad, and with the Colts starting only 1-3, you still have a 1-game lead over them. Next, we'll go over the Chiefs and Eagles, with the Chiefs winning that game 42-30. Now, the game was actually very close, like surprisingly close in my mind. Obviously, the entire game was really close. In that 4th quarter, Kansas City scored 2 touchdowns, but had Devontae Smith not stepped out of bounds and had that touchdown, which is now like the 2nd time that's happened to him, I believe, right? It would have been a very, very close ball game down the stretch. But again, this is kind of what we talked about last week with the Kansas City Chiefs starting the season, 1-2. Their defense is so bad, every team puts up 30 points. Philly last week, their offense looked horrible against Dallas. And this game, not only did they put up 30, but they could have had 37 had Devontae Smith not stepped out of bounds on that play. Obviously, with Kansas City's offense, no surprises there. Patrick Mahomes threw for 5 touchdowns, was 24 of 30, super efficient, 278 yards. He did have 1 interception. The ground game was very good. They totaled 32 carries for 200 yards on the ground, with Clyde Edwards-Helaire leading the way with 14 carries for 102 yards. Tyreek Hill had an absolutely crazy game, 11 receptions, 186 yards, and 3 TDs. You don't really have to talk too much about Kansas City's offense. You know their offense is elite, and they're going to be good all season. It's really just, if this defense continues to play this bad, it's going to be tough to not make the playoffs. They're going to make the playoffs just based on how good their offense is. When you get in the postseason and you're playing good teams, because that's all you play in the postseason is good teams that have good offenses and good defenses, it's going to be tough for Kansas City to come out of the AFC because their defense is so bad. Every week in a playoff series, they're going to give up 30, 35, 40 points, and you're going to be playing against a good defense more than likely that can maybe get a stop or 2. Obviously for Philly, you lose, drop to 1-3. I don't really think it's that big of a deal. I think maybe some Eagles fans thought they had a chance to win the division this year coming into it. But I think realistically, everyone realizes that Philly is definitely in a rebuilding stage. They have 3 first-round picks next year. So it's really just about seeing how Justin Hurts plays this season and is he the quarterback moving forward. Because if he's not, they have either A, 3 first-round picks to try to get Deshaun Watson in, or if he is the option, you have 3 first-round picks to build around him. Or even if he's not the option and Deshaun Watson is no longer a trade option, you still have 3 first-round picks to maybe go find your quarterback. Now, obviously, up against a bad Kansas City defense, take the numbers for what they are, but Jalen Hurts did play very well. He was 32 of 48, 387 yards, 2 touchdowns. So obviously played a very good game. But again, you know, you want to see him do it against better defenses, not against the worst defenses in the league. And for Kansas City, you almost had to win this ball game. If you lost this game, there would have been so much negative, media attention towards a 1-3 start, especially having Buffalo coming in this upcoming week, But with getting the win, now you're in a situation where if you beat Buffalo next week, everyone will kind of be quiet on the whole, Kansas City might miss the playoffs or lose 5, 6, 7 games. Now, if you lose to Buffalo, it's going to be a question of, hey, we know this offense is elite, but with that bad defense, it's going to be tough for them to win against good football teams, because that will be the case if they lose. Next, we'll go over the Cardinals-Rams. Very shocking game, with the Cardinals kind of blowing them out 37-20. The game was kind of close early, meaning just the first quarter. In that second quarter, Arizona scored 2 touchdowns, kind of took a double-digit lead. And then in the third quarter, they were able to score 3 consecutive times. There's 2 field goals and 1 touchdown, but, when you're up 11 going into the half and you score 11 straight points, that kind of just puts the ball game away for you. So obviously this game is just a huge letdown game if you're the Los Angeles Rams after coming off a huge beatdown yourself of the Buccaneers. At this point, it kind of just seems like it was a letdown game where it's like, okay, we're the best team in the league, right? We're the #1 in the power rankings. We got Arizona coming in, and we are like 8-0 in the last 8 games against Arizona. Sure, they got a good offense, but their defense is terrible, and you kind of take it for granted and kind of have a bad game. Now, give Arizona a lot of credit. They did have to go in there and play as well as they played. And I don't really give them credit for playing that well, but offensively for keeping their foot on the gas pedal and not allowing the Rams to actually come back by continuing to score in that third quarter. Kyler Murray, one of the front runners, if not, I believe now the front runner for the MVP in terms of betting favorites, was 24 of 32, 268 yards, 2 TDs. And then the ground game was actually surprisingly very good against that good Rams front 7. They had 40 carries for 216 yards and 2 TDs. I guess that's going to be the difficult part when you play Arizona, is they have such good wide receivers. Obviously, you have D-Hop, who's a top 5 receiver, but AJ Green looks like he's a good receiver as well. He hasn't lost anything. He's still a good quality receiver. And now he's getting the second corner, so he's going to probably kill all season long. It makes it tough because you almost have to have double safeties to guard both receivers, and that means you're never having 8 in the box to stop the run. But obviously with the game, more surprised with how good Arizona's defense played and how bad Los Angeles Rams' offense played to only put up 20 points. And realistically, it was 13 because you scored a touchdown late in the game when it was absolutely over. So this was one of Stafford's worst games, with going just 26 of 41, 280 yards, 2 touchdowns and a pick. And again, 1 touchdown was at the very end of the ball game. Darrell Henderson had a pretty decent game, 14 carries for 89 yards. So when you look at the stats, you're like, man, seems like everyone played pretty well, but it was just obviously giving up 37 points, you can't just play well, you have to play very good. But, obviously late second quarter, early third quarter, pretty much all third quarter, they weren't really able to do much, and you let Arizona build an 11-point lead to a 24-point lead. Obviously, if you're the loss for the Rams, it's not too big of a deal. You're at 3-1. You're still very good record going into, week 5. For the Arizona Cardinals, though, to be 4-0 at this point, I don't know if anybody would have thought they would have been 4-0. So if you're Arizona, this is obviously a very good start for you. At this point, you're almost guaranteed to make the playoffs. Not guaranteed. You could have a losing streak, but it's tough to see. Most teams that start the season 4-0 don't miss the playoffs. I think statistically speaking, I want to say it's over 80 or 90. It's 80 to 90% of teams that start 4-0 do end up making the postseason. So you have a very good chance of making it now. You almost have to have a collapse or a big injury of some sort to like Kyler Murray in order to miss the playoffs. So that's good for the Cardinals' perspective to start off as hot as you have. Quickly go over this Seattle Seahawks and 49ers game. It was a final of 28-21, so pretty close ball game. Obviously, Russell Wilson needed that game. They needed a win to kind of give themselves a chance to kind of stay around that 500 marker like we talked about, to give themselves, a shot to not fall out of the postseason, race early in the season. And he absolutely delivered with a spectacular game against a very good defense in the San Francisco 49ers. Super efficient like he always is, 16 for 23, 149 yards, 2 touchdowns passing. Added a rushing touchdown. The running game in general was pretty decent, 28 carries, 105 yards with a 3.8 average. So not great, but again, you're up against a very good front seven for the San Francisco 49ers. So even being average to slightly below is still good enough to keep some pressure off of Russell Wilson, where he doesn't have to throw it 40 times and the defense knows he's throwing it. Obviously, the big story of this game was Jimmy G got knocked out in the first half and Trey Lance had to come in the second half. He played surprisingly well considering he wasn't the starter, so he wasn't get starter reps in practice. So he finished the game, Trey Lance did, 9 for 18, 157 yards and 2 TDs, no turnovers, so played a pretty efficient game. Obviously for both teams, with the Niners, you would have loved to get a win, but even with the loss at 2-2, it doesn't look good for you winning the division, but at the end of the day, I don't think you really care about that. You just want to get into the playoffs, so you still have a shot. So it's early in the season, so you obviously want to win games like this when you have an opportunity to, so that's unfortunate. But at 2-2, it's not like you fell to a record where you're like, oh man, we're in like kind of desperation mode. And then again, like we talked about with Seattle, it's almost a must win at that point. Coming into the game at 1-2, you did not want to fall to 1-3. Next, we'll go over the Ravens-Broncos, and with that being a final of 23-7. Again, like we talked about last week, actually, with Denver starting 3-0, was it more so the fact that they started and their first 3 games were against all winless teams in Jacksonville, the Giants, and the Jets? Was it more a product of just playing very bad teams, or is this Bronco team very good? And like I said last week, we're going to see very quickly, because you get Baltimore and a couple other very good teams coming up. They looked obviously very bad against Baltimore, losing 23-7. Again, I was very close in the first half just because the Broncos defense is very good. They were able to kind of hold and contain the Ravens offense to just 7 in the first half. But again, it puts a lot of pressure on that defense because Denver's offense couldn't really move the ball or sustain any type of offense. So eventually Lamar Jackson and that offense is going to hit some big plays, which they did. And they were kind of able to build a big enough lead to put the game away in that second half. Like we said with the Broncos, obviously they got Pittsburgh coming up this week, but then they get the Las Vegas Raiders, the Cleveland Browns, the Washington football team, and the Dallas Cowboys. So we're going to quickly find out over these next 3-4 games, how good is this Denver Broncos team? If they were to beat Pittsburgh, but let's just say lose their next 2, right, and they're going to be at that point 4-3, well, maybe they're just an 8-8 kind of football team that they can beat the bad teams, but they're going to have a tough time winning against a good team. For Baltimore, kind of just you do what you're supposed to do. You play a team that maybe you're supposed to beat, and they're 3-1 now, and you kind of beat them handily. If you're Baltimore, obviously your hopes are trying to win the division, maybe even get the #1 seed potentially, and try to give yourself a bye week. I think for the Ravens getting the 1 seed, is probably, they're probably the one team that really wants the 1 seed, because they're more predicated on running the ball. So at that point, you're more of a physical football team. So having a week off is more beneficial than like a passing offense that, needs rhythm and timing. You maybe don't want that week off if you're a passing offense, because sometimes you might, with that week off, you're kind of rusty to come out. It's tough to be rusty if you're just a physical football team. But obviously it's way too early to be talking about that. But again, if you are Baltimore and you're trying to get the 1 seed, you have to stack wins early. Next, we'll go over the Steelers and Packers. And obviously with this game, again, like almost every week we talk about, the Pittsburgh offense looks super anemic, really can't do much. There's kind of talk about maybe benching Big Ben because he's obviously clearly lost it. Every throw is a short dump off throw, and it's like he doesn't want to push the ball downfield, or maybe he can't. He did have the one nice throw, his very first possession, the first touchdown throw at least specifically. But, you know, it looks like with how bad this offense is playing, they're going to need their defense to play very, very dominantly. And again, when you're up against a good Packers offense, that's probably not going to be the case. But, you know, Pittsburgh's still in a spot where if they're playing some, you know, 500 level teams and below, they should be able to win some of those games. Huge play was the field goal block for a touchdown. You know, that is a 10-point swing that I didn't think they were offsides. And again, you lost the game by 10. So had that play gone your way, kind of like the Buffalo game where you had the blocked punt for a touchdown, you know, had you had that play get called in your favor, this might have been a much different ball game, and maybe you could have pulled it out. But again, that seems like that's going to be the Steelers' formula for winning ball games this year. Going to have to play great defense, make some big plays, whether it's in special teams or the defensive side of the ball, in order to give yourself a chance to win against the good football teams. For Green Bay, you know, kind of like a tale of two teams for this game specifically, right? Pittsburgh started 1-0 and lost 3 in a row. Green Bay started 0-1 and have won 3 in a row to kind of quiet everyone down. The game against New Orleans was obviously just an aberration game, and the Packers are going to be fine all season. Now with the Sunday night game with the Buccaneers and the Patriots, obviously a very big game, right, with New England, you know, and Tom Brady going back to New England, obviously played there for 20 years, won 6 Super Bowls there. Now, obviously, just looking at the game itself, Bill Belichick obviously played a very good defensive strategy against, you know, Tom Brady and the Bucs. Now, obviously, probably a super emotional game for Tom Brady. He did miss a couple of throws, but again, he wasn't like he has been all season where he's just carving up defenses, throwing for 350 yards and 4 TDs every week. He actually struggled this game. You know, you look at the final numbers for Brady, he was 22 of 43, 269 yards with no touchdowns and no interceptions. But if you watch the game, he clearly was like a little bit off. And then not only was he a little bit off, but the defense obviously made some big plays. Because for Brady to complete roughly 50% of his passes, that's not good. Now, give Fournette credit, he was able to run the ball a little bit more than I think most teams thought that the Bucs could run, where he was 20 carries for 91 yards. The team totaled 30 carries for 119 yards. You know, you look at Mac Jones' stats from New England's perspective, he was 31 of 40. So very good completion percentage, 275 yards, 2 touchdowns and a pick. So obviously he played well enough to win. I think if New England's offense can play like that for most of the season, they're going to give themselves a chance because that defense is very good. This could be a game where they look at and say, you know what, we played the champs and we played them so close, we can win against anybody in this league. For the Bucs, obviously, and just the ending of the game specifically, it was kind of funny and ironic for Tom Brady to go in there and have a game-winning drive to kind of seal it for them, kind of like he had done for the New England Patriots for the last 20 years. So it was funny to have the Patriots fans see what everyone else in the league has felt for the last 20 years. And lastly, we'll finish up with the Raiders and Chargers. Kind of like we said last week, right? The Chargers were able to go up 21-0. So with the Raiders, they were now down multiple scores again, like last week against Miami. They were down 14-0. It's very difficult against a good football team to go down that many points and actually come back and win. Now, obviously, give the Raiders credit. They were able to score 2 touchdowns to make the game close again. But even after that, the Chargers scored one more time to put themselves up 14. About 5-6 minutes to go in the ball game, and that kind of iced it for them. Obviously, both teams now starting at 3-1. I think if you're both teams, you would still take this start. Obviously, if you're the Raiders, you would have loved to get to 4-0. And if you're the Chargers, obviously a big win to get up to 3-1. But I think both teams, again, would take the 3-1 start. You're obviously off to a good start at 3-1, right? If you can keep this momentum up, you have a good shot if you're both teams to make the playoffs. Obviously, your division is very difficult with Denver being 3-1 and, you know, the Chiefs, which we know are the best team in that division. They're obviously 2-2, but over the long-term season, we probably all think that Kansas City's going to win the division. So again, at 3-1, you give yourself a chance, if you're really all teams in that division, to kind of make the playoffs. I guess we'll just quickly go over the stats for the game. Justin Herbert has played exceptional really all season. He really just had the one bad game, surprisingly, again, against Dallas. He was 25 of 38, 222 yards, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions, 74 quarterback rating, so obviously played phenomenal. Austin Ekeler was very good as well, 15 carries, 117 yards, and a touchdown. Rushing, also added through the air, 3 catches for 28 yards with another TD. Raiders offense kind of disappointed, right? Their offense had been so explosive and so good all season that Chargers defense was really able to contain them to season lows in almost every category. right? If you look at Derek Carr, he only threw for 196 yards, so by far his lowest. The run game, 18 carries for 48 yards, so really did nothing on the ground, right? Again, only scored 14 points. So really, you know, if you're the Raiders, probably a combination of you just had a bad game. If you're the Las Vegas offense, you just had a kind of a bad game, and the Chargers defense playing a little good. So that's going to do it for the Week 4 recap. Again, if you guys got this far, I really appreciate you guys for watching and listening in. And if you did make it this far, make sure to hit a like, as that does help out the channel. If you're not subscribed, consider subscribing, as that helps the channel as well. But thank you guys so much for watching, and I look forward to watching the Week 5 games and updating you guys on those as well. Thank you guys so much. Bye.